In a small, rain-soaked town haunted by old secrets, the mysterious disappearance of 17-year-old Rachel Moore shatters the peace of Elmridge. As her best friend Emily and Detective Hadley search for answers, they uncover a chilling pattern of vanished teens, eerie symbols, and the shadowy legend of the Hollow Man. With each clue, the line between reality and nightmare blurs, and the darkness at the edge of the woods grows ever closer. This is the story of a girl who vanished without a trace on the nightmare, her absence awakened. Before we dive into tonight's mystery, make sure to hit subscribe and join our community of true crime and horror lovers. Share your theories and thoughts in the comments. Every detail matters, and your voice could help us uncover the truth. Turn on notifications so you never miss a chilling episode of Dark Knight Chronicles TV. Now, let's step into the shadows together. Vanished without a trace. The mysterious disappearance of Rachel Moore. In the quiet rain soaked town of Elmridge, the world moved at its own slow, steady pace. Nights fell heavy here, with clouds that seemed to suffocate the moon, and a silence so thick you could almost taste it. Elmridge wasn't known for much. A forgotten lumber mill, an abandoned rail line, the echo of church bells on Sunday mornings. But if you wandered far enough down the cracked streets after midnight, you'd notice the shadows stretched just a bit longer than they should. If you listened close enough, sometimes you could hear something breathing in the darkness. Something that didn't belong. On a chilled autumn night in 2003, the Moore family's modest home at the edge of Pine Hollow buzzed with quiet routine. Rachel Moore, 17, moved like a ghost herself, slipping through the world unnoticed. A Strata student. Quiet, distant, loved by some, forgotten by most. She was the kind of girl who wrote poetry she never showed, kept secrets she never told, and carried a sadness that no one could name. Her disappearance began, like all true horrors do, not with a scream, but with silence. On October 19th, Rachel vanished. No sign of struggle, no evidence left behind. Her bedroom was untouched. Her phone sat on her pillow. The front door was locked from the inside. It was as if the night itself had swallowed her whole. But as the days stretched on, and the search for Rachel began, the shadows of Elmridge grew deeper. Townspeople whispered about strange lights in the woods, about the woman who stared from the old orphanage window, about a presence that haunted the Pine Hollow Bridge. Cops gritted their teeth and mothers held their children tighter, praying it was just another runaway, hoping it wasn't something worse. As the investigation unfolded, what emerged was more than a missing person case. It was a tapestry of fear, secrets, and ancient darkness woven into the heart of the town. Because in Elmridge, nothing ever truly disappears. And sometimes the thing you're searching for is searching for you. This is the story of Rachel Moore, the girl who vanished without a trace, and the nightmare her disappearance awakened. Whispers in the woods, Elmridge, Maine, a town forgotten by the maps and by time itself. Even before the events that would shatter its fragile calm, there was always something uneasy beneath its surface, something that crept in with the mist every night, something that seemed to whisper just out of hearing. To outsiders, Elmridge was nothing more than a cluster of weathered homes, single gas station, an old church, and the endless sweep of Pine Hollow woods surrounding the town on all sides like a living wall. But for those who lived there, the woods were more than just a backdrop. They were an ever-present boundary, a place of stories and childhood dares. The subject of every parent's warning and every child's nightmare. It was here, on the ragged edge, where town and wildness met, that Rachel Moore often walked. Sometimes alone, sometimes trailing behind her best friend, Emily Carter. To Emily, the woods were a place of danger. To Rachel, they were a strange kind of sanctuary. Rachel's life at 17 was a delicate balance between visibility and invisibility. She was always just out of focus, never the loudest voice, rarely the center of a crowd. She moved through the halls of Elmridge high with quiet grace, tall. Pale, her dark hair always a little messy, eyes set deep with a thoughtful sadness. She was a Strata student, but not a teacher's favorite. It's a polite but not popular, the kind of girl who could vanish into a room unnoticed unless you looked for her, and few people did. Rachel's mother, Margaret, often watched her daughter with a mix of pride and helpless concern. She saw the way Rachel's fingers trembled sometimes, how she lingered at the window long after sunset, how her smiles never quite reached her eyes. Rachel's father, Harold, was less attuned, always busy fixing things around the house, or lost in the muted flicker of old television shows. He believed that what could not be seen could not hurt you, a belief that would be shaken to its core. Autumn in Elmridge had a way of deepening the shadows. The woods took on an amber glow, the air crisp with the promise of early frost, and the nights grew longer. On those evenings, Rachel often slipped away from the noise of her home. Following a well-worn path along the edge of Pine Hollow, she would wander between the twisted pines, listening to the hush that fell over the world as darkness crept in. Sometimes she wrote poetry in her battered notebook. Sometimes she just listened to the world breathe. Emily Carter, meanwhile, had always been the more practical of the two. With her copper hair tied back in a messy ponytail, freckles dusting her nose, and a determined stride, she was the one who made plans, asked questions, and didn't shy away from conflict. She'd grown up with Rachel since kindergarten, the pair inseparable in those early years. But she'd noticed a change as they moved into high school. Rachel had become more withdrawn, less likely to join a group, more likely to walk alone with her thoughts. It was Emily who first noticed the fear in Rachel's eyes. They sat together in the school cafeteria, a noisy room where Emily thrived and Rachel shrank away. Emily tried to make Rachel laugh, to pull her into conversations about classes, teachers, even the cute senior who worked at the gas station. But Rachel stared at her tray, picking at her food, her gaze flicking again and again to the windows where the woods pressed close against the schoolyard. "Are you okay?" Emily asked one day, her voice low. Rachel looked up, eyes distant, haunted. "There's something out there," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Emily forced a smile. "Yeah, it's called 1,000 squirrels, and that crazy old raccoon. Or maybe the ghost of Principal Duffy haunting us all for not doing our math homework." Rachel managed a weak laugh, but it died almost instantly. She looked back to the window. "No, I feel it watching me, not just at school, everywhere in the woods. At night, sometimes even in my dreams." Emily frowned. She wanted to shake Rachel, to pull her back to the real world. Instead, she reached over and squeezed her friend's hand. "You're just stressed. Senior year sucks. I'll walk you home after class, okay?" Rachel nodded, but Emily saw that her friend's smile was as brittle as autumn leaves. The days grew shorter. The woods seemed to creep closer, their edges swallowing the weak daylight earlier and earlier. Children hurried home after school, and even the bravest boys stopped daring each other to venture past the old bridge after sunset. Strange rumors began to bubble up again, rumors that in Elmridge never really died. There were stories of figures seen among the trees, tall and thin, moving in ways no person should move. Some said the shadows in Pine Hollow sometimes grew eyes. Others, especially the elderly, spoke of the Hollow Man, a figure from old folk tales blamed for missing pets and lost hikers. Rachel had always laughed at those stories, but now she wasn't so sure. One night in mid-October, Rachel's mother noticed her daughter lingering on the porch, staring into the dark. "Come inside, honey. It's getting cold." Rachel jumped, startled, and turned to her mother. Margaret saw, for the first time, real fear in Rachel's face. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Rachel hesitated. Do you believe in things we can't see?" Margaret smiled gently, hiding her worry. I believe in a lot of things, but I believe in you more." Rachel tried to return the smile, then slipped past her mother and went straight to her room. That night, Emily's phone buzzed. A message from Rachel sent at 2:13 a.m. "Don't go into the woods, promise me." Emily read it, heart pounding. She tried to call, but there was no answer. At school the next day, Rachel was even more withdrawn. She barely spoke, barely ate, her eyes shadowed by exhaustion. Emily pressed her, but Rachel shook her head. "It's nothing," she said. But Emily knew she was lying. On Friday, Emily watched as Rachel slipped away at lunch, heading toward the woods behind the school. Something about the way Rachel moved, hurried, glancing over her shoulder, made Emily uneasy. Without thinking, she followed. The path behind the school was muddy, the ground thick with rotting leaves. Emily kept her distance, moving quietly. She saw Rachel stop beneath an old oak, its trunk split by lightning long ago. Rachel stood perfectly still, her head tilted, as if listening to something only she could hear. Emily froze. She heard nothing, no birds, no wind, only the heavy silence of the woods. Rachel began to speak. Emily couldn't hear the words, but she saw the fear on her friend's face. Suddenly, a cold wind whipped through the trees. Emily thought she saw a shape tall, impossibly thin move in the fog behind Rachel. Rachel turned, her eyes wide, her face pale. She hurried back toward the school, nearly running into Emily. "Did you see it?" Rachel whispered, clutching Emily's arm. "See what?" Emily asked, alarmed. But Rachel just shook her head. "It's here. It follows me everywhere. Please, you have to believe me." Emily wanted to run, to drag Rachel out of the woods and back to the safety of school. But she felt rooted in place, paralyzed by a fear she couldn't explain. They hurried back to the edge of the woods, neither daring to look behind. That night, Emily dreamed of trees bleeding black sap, of eyes glinting in the darkness, of Rachel's face twisted in fear, mouthing words she could not understand. When Emily awoke, she found a new message on her phone sent just after midnight. "Don't go into the woods, promise me," Emily replied. "I promise." But even as she typed the words, she knew the promise was already broken. Rachel Moore had always been a ghost in her own life. Now it seemed the woods wanted her for real. The signs. The disappearance of Rachel Moore rippled through Elmridge like a cold wind, unsettling everything it touched. Old men who usually sat outside the gas station in battered lawn chairs now lingered indoors, peering anxiously through fogged glass. Children hurried past the edge of Pine Hollow with their heads down, clutching backpacks close. For days, the air itself seemed heavy, full of tension, secrets, and fear. Margaret Moore barely slept. Every sound in the house became a question. Was that Rachel's step in the hall? Was that her key in the lock? Margaret haunted the living room, jumping at the ring of the phone, trembling every time a car slowed outside. Harold Moore coped in his own way silently, almost angrily. He cleaned the garage twice, then repainted the kitchen. Then sat in the dark, with the television volume low, listening for Rachel's voice. Emily Carter woke early the morning after Rachel disappeared, her pillow damp with tears. She hadn't slept much. The memory of Rachel's fear haunted her. She texted her friend over and over, no response. The sun had barely risen when Emily threw on jeans and a sweater, skipped breakfast, and walked the 4 blocks to the Moore house. She arrived to find police cars parked outside, officers moving through the yard, their radios crackling with static. Detective Mark Hadley greeted her at the door. He was older than she expected, with a tired face and gray streaks in his hair. "You're Emily?" he asked quietly. She nodded, voice caught in her throat. Inside, the house was hushed. Margaret looked up, her eyes swollen. "She's gone," she whispered. She never came home last night." Emily sat beside her on the worn couch, holding her hand as officers moved through the house, photographing every room. Hadley asked questions. "When was the last time you saw Rachel? Did she say anything unusual? Had she ever run away before?" Emily tried to answer, but her words jumbled together. She was scared. She said something was following her. "She told me not to go into the woods." Hadley took notes, nodding with a grim set to his jaw. By afternoon, Rachel's disappearance was the talk of every shop, every classroom, every kitchen table. Flyers appeared on telephone poles, in the post office, at the library. Rachel's face, staring back at a town that suddenly realized how little it truly knew her. At Elmridge High, teachers spoke in low voices. Some tried to maintain order. Others gave up and let their students talk it out. In the cafeteria, clusters of teenagers speculated wildly. "She probably just ran away. No, I heard someone saw her near the bridge. My brother says he saw weird lights in the woods last night." Emily sat by herself, ignoring the stares, picking at her food. Every sound seemed sharper. Now the scrape of trays, the buzz of the old vending machine, the rain ticking on the windows. She kept seeing Rachel in every empty seat, hearing her laugh in every echo. After school, Emily walked home by a different route, past the library and the shuttered hardware store. Cutting across the park where she and Rachel used to play as children, the swings creaked in the wind. Someone had left a single glove on the bench, pale and forgotten. That evening, Emily scoured her phone for any message she'd missed. any clue Rachel might have left. She reread their last conversations, her heart twisting at Rachel's final words. "Don't go into the woods. Promise me." In her room, Emily spread out Rachel's poetry notebooks. She looked for pattern-certain words that kept repeating, sketches of spiral shapes and staring eyes. She made a list of everything Rachel had mentioned in the last week. Nightmares. Shadows at her window. A voice whispering from the woods. Emily's mother knocked on her door. "Dinner's ready," she said softly. "I'm not hungry," Emily replied. She was still staring at the same page when the sun set. On the edge of town, the first search parties assembled. Dozens of neighbors and volunteers, some in work boots, some in raincoats, all with grim determination, fanned out into Pine Hollow. Flashlights bobbed through the darkness, dogs barked at things unseen, and Detective Hadley's voice called again and again through the trees. "Rachel, Rachel Moore." The woods swallowed their voices. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then in heavy sheets. One by one, the searchers returned to the town square, faces shadowed, boots caked in mud, shaking their heads. Emily sat on her porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the blinking red and blue of the police lights. She saw Margaret standing by the front door, unmoving, as if she could will Rachel home by sheer force of hope. Inside the Moore house, Detective Hadley moved carefully through Rachel's bedroom. It was spotless, the bed perfectly made, everything in its place. The only sign of disturbance was the journal lying open on the desk. He read the last entry, written in Rachel's tight, hurried script. "It's getting closer. I hear it outside my window at night. If anything happens, look in the hollow." He looked out the window into the woods, the darkness pressing close, and felt the prickling of old childhood fears. By midnight, the search was called off for the night. Hadley drove home in silence. Emily lay awake, her mind racing with questions, the wind rattling her window. Somewhere out in the woods, something watched and waited, and Elmridge, for the first time in years, truly felt afraid. The disappearance. For most of Elmridge, life kept moving forward. Even as Rachel Moore's absence hollowed out every conversation and cast long shadows over daily routines. Store owners whispered behind their counters, eyes flicking toward the woods as customers trickled in and out. The news crew from Portland parked their van in front of the town hall, camera lights occasionally flaring against the rain-washed windows. But for those closest to Rachel, time seemed to stop altogether. Emily Carter barely recognized herself anymore. She moved through her days as if underwater. Her grades slipped. She forgot her lunch at home. She walked with her head down, clutching her phone, and dreading a message from Rachel would appear. She sat in classes, staring through the rain-streaked glass, watching the mist gather under the trees. The Moore family fractured under the weight of the unknown. Margaret Moore wandered through the house, starting chores she never finished. She folded and refolded Rachel's laundry, arranged her books by color and then by height, sat on her daughter's bed and wept quietly. Her hand on the pillow where Rachel's head had rested. Harold, stoic and silent, busied himself in the garage or disappeared for hours at a time, turning only when exhaustion overwhelmed his anger and grief. Detective Hadley came and went, always with a notepad in his hand. He spent hours interviewing neighbors, piecing together Rachel's last known movements. He questioned bus drivers, teachers, the clerk at the convenience store. Every answer brought more questions. "She was quiet, but polite," said her math teacher. "She always seemed sad," offered the bus driver. "I saw her at the edge of the woods last week," whispered the old woman who lived near the logging road. She was talking to herself. Emily began to notice strange things. At night she heard whispers at her window, voices too faint to understand. Her dreams became vivid and unsettling. Rachel, lost in the trees, reaching out with empty, pleading eyes. Sometimes Emily woke with her heart pounding, convinced that someone or something was standing in the hallway. One afternoon, Emily found herself walking along the edge of Pine Hollow, drawn there by a compulsion she couldn't explain. The trees pressed close, branches tangled with dead leaves and pale lichen. The path felt colder, the air thicker, as if the world itself was holding its breath. She remembered walking here with Rachel last spring when the world was greener and their laughter seemed to echo forever. They had dared each other to cross the rickety bridge over the stream. Rachel had paused in the center, arms outstretched, eyes closed, letting the breeze lift her hair. "It feels like flying," she'd said, grinning. Emily had been too afraid to let go of the railing. Now, Standing alone on that same bridge, Emily felt only fear. As she left the woods, she spotted a spiral burned into the grass near the tree line. It was small, no bigger than a dinner plate, but the grass inside the spiral was black and brittle, the edges curling like old paper. Emily crouched beside it, running her fingers just above the scorched earth. The air smelled faintly of ozone and ash. She took out her phone and snapped a picture. That night, she sent it to Detective Hadley with a brief message. "Found this near where Rachel liked to walk. Does it mean anything?" He responded in less than 5 minutes. "I'm coming by in the morning. Don't go back alone." But Emily couldn't help herself. The spiral lingered in her mind. She searched for similar patterns online, finding only strange folklore and stories of witchcraft and vanished children. None of it felt real, but everything felt possible. The next morning, she met Hadley at the site. He knelt beside the spiral, measuring, photographing, bagging a handful of the brittle grass for testing. "Looks like a burn," he murmured, "but there's no sign of a campfire. And the shape. It's too perfect." Anxiety twisting her insides. "Do you think it's a clue? Or just another prank?" Hadley stood and looked at the woods, his face drawn and pale. "I don't believe in much," he said quietly, "but I believe someone or something wanted you to find this." That evening, Emily scrolled through Rachel's notebooks again. She found page after page filled with spirals, some big, some small. Sometimes just doodles in the corners, sometimes filling an entire sheet. Underneath one, Rachel had written in shaky pencil, "He waits in the hollow. He is the hollow." Emily shivered and closed the notebook. She could still hear Rachel's voice in her mind. "Don't go into the woods, promise me." The days blurred. Rumors spread about strangers seen near the woods, about cults, about the old stories from Elmridge's founding. Nights Margaret Moore would sit up in bed, certain she'd heard Rachel's footsteps on the stairs. Sometimes Harold would slam the door and drive into the night, unable to bear the house's emptiness. The search parties dwindled as hope faded. But Emily refused to give up. She carried Rachel's old scarf everywhere, breathing in the faint trace of perfume, holding on to the last piece of her friend that still felt real. Late one night, Emily dreamed she was back in the woods, following the spiral deeper and deeper until the trees closed in, the sky disappeared, and she was utterly alone. A whisper drifted through the darkness. "Help me, Em. Please, don't let it take me." Emily woke, her cheeks wet with tears, the world outside her window, silent and still. And somewhere, beneath the surface of Elmridge, the secret waited patient, hungry, ready to be found. The search. In the days that followed, Elmridge seemed to transform. The search for Rachel Moore became a ritual, a desperate hope that stitched the town together, even as it threatened to unravel everyone who participated. Margaret Moore woke before dawn every morning, boiling coffee for the volunteers who gathered in her kitchen. She thanked each person by name, her voice trembling as she forced herself to smile. Emily Carter was always first to arrive, boots muddy, eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights. She mapped out areas of the woods with a yellow highlighter, copying Detective Hadley's notes into her own spiral notebook. Her mother tried to stop her from joining the search parties, but Emily refused to stay home. "She's my best friend," she said. "I have to help." The volunteers were an odd mix: retired lumberjacks, grocery clerks, teachers, teenagers, even a few tourists who'd heard about the case on the news. They trudged through the woods in lines, calling Rachel's name, peering into every hollow and ditch, shining flashlights under fallen logs. Detective Hadley organized each day with grim precision. He assigned groups, radioed in their positions, marked every path on the town's old surveyor's map. By the end of the first week, the search grid had expanded to cover nearly every inch of Pine Hollow and the old train tracks. Still nothing. At night, Emily sat on her porch, staring at the lights bobbing in the woods as searchers returned. She wondered if Rachel could see them, if somewhere, somehow her friend was out there waiting to be found. One evening after another fruitless day, Emily stopped at the library. She hoped to find comfort in the routine, the smell of old paper. The hush between the stacks, Mrs. Barnes, the librarian, greeted her with a sad smile. "Still looking for answers, dear?" Emily nodded. "I can't let it go. None of it makes sense. I keep thinking, what if we're missing something? What if she left us a clue, and we just haven't found it." Mrs. Barnes patted Emily's hand.
You're a good friend.
"If anyone can bring her home, it's you."
Ah.
Emily spent hours combing through old newspapers. She found other disappearances, names she didn't recognize, faces lost to time. Each story was similar: a teenager gone without a trace, last seen near Pine Hollow. The articles always ended the same way. The search was called off after a week. No evidence was found. The case remains unsolved. She photocopied every article and added them to her growing stack of notes. Meanwhile, the town grew more anxious. Parents forbade their children from playing near the woods, store windows filled with posters. "Have you seen Rachel Moore?" Her photo staring directly at the camera, dark hair falling across one eye, became a constant reminder of what was missing. Rumors ran wild. Some kids claimed they saw strange lights drifting between the trees at night. Others whispered about footprints that disappeared in the mud, or shadows that moved without making a sound. A few believed Rachel had run away, but most sensed a darker truth. Emily couldn't shake the memory of the spiral. She drew it over and over in the margins of her notebook, tracing its curves until her hand ached. She began to dream of spirals, swirling shapes that pulled her deeper into the woods, into darkness, into silence. One Sunday afternoon, Emily and Detective Hadley met in his cluttered office at the station. He spread out the search grid, marking every spot already covered. "We're missing something," he muttered. "We're not looking in the right place." Emily glanced at his desk. It was covered in maps, Rachel's journal, and a handful of blackened grass from the spiral she'd found. "Do you believe in the old stories?" Emily asked, her voice low. Hadley hesitated. "I don't know what I believe anymore. I've seen a lot of things in this town I can't explain." Outside, rain battered the windows. Emily stared at the spiral in Rachel's notebook, the same shape that had appeared in the grass. "Maybe we need to look for something that isn't there," she whispered. "Maybe the answer is in what we can't see." The searches continued for weeks. Some people lost hope, drifting back to their daily routines. But Emily and Hadley pressed on, following every lead, chasing every rumor. One night, a group of searchers returned pale and shaking. "We saw something in the woods," one whispered. "It wasn't an animal. It was watching us." The townsfolk began to avoid Pine Hollow after dark. The woods grew quieter. Even the birds seemed to flee. But Emily did not stop searching. She carried Rachel's old scarf everywhere, the fabric growing thinner, the scent of her friend slowly fading. She made a silent promise to herself and to Rachel. "I won't give up. I won't let the woods win." And so, the search continued, driven by love, by fear, and by the desperate hope that somewhere, somehow Rachel Moore was waiting to be found. Secrets and shadows. As the search dragged on and the days bled into weeks, Elmridge felt the strain in every quiet moment. People stopped lingering on their porches after sunset. Church pews filled with anxious prayers, and children whispered new rules for playing near the edge of the woods. The sense of dread was everywhere, a silent fog nobody could shake. Margaret Moore lost weight. Her cheeks grew hollow, and her eyes, once warm, seemed always red and distant. She moved like a sleepwalker through her days, answering police questions she could barely remember. She replayed every memory of Rachel, searching for some moment she'd missed, some sign she could have acted on. One evening, she found herself sitting in Rachel's room with the door closed, the lights off. She traced her fingers over Rachel's notebooks, their pages full of poetry, half-finished doodles, and more of those haunting spirals. On a scrap of paper, she found a single sentence in Rachel's handwriting. "Sometimes the shadows feel realer than the light." Margaret wept until her body shook, then fell into an exhausted sleep on Rachel's bed. Across town, Emily Carter's world shrank to three things: school, searching for Rachel, and avoiding her own home. Where her mother's concern felt suffocating. At night, Emily scribbled notes in her journal, comparing them to Rachel's drawings and memories. She read about the other disappearances in Elmridge's history. In the dusty archives of the library, she found references to the Hollow Man and the phrase, "the woods remember." Emily started to see patterns everywhere: a spiral in spilled coffee, shadows swirling on her bedroom wall. Once, as she walked home, she heard a low voice call her name from the tree line. She turned, heart pounding, but saw nothing except the shifting fog. She tried to confide in Detective Hadley, who was growing more obsessed with the case by the day. His office was a collage of maps, missing person flyers, crime scene photos, and sticky notes scribbled with connections only he could follow. Hadley interviewed everyone he could think of: friends, teachers, delivery drivers, even vagrants passing through on the old rail line. He discovered that every 20 years, a young person had vanished from the edge of Pine Hollow. In every case, the police had found nothing, just silence, sorrow, and the woods refusing to give up their dead. The town grew suspicious. Rumors spread. Maybe it's a cult. Maybe someone in town is responsible. Maybe the woods take what they want. One night, Emily received an anonymous message on her phone. "You're getting too close. Stay away from the hollow." Her hands shook as she showed the text to Hadley the next morning. He grew more determined, convinced now that Rachel's case was different, that maybe this time they could bring someone back. The fear and stress began to change everyone. Parents fought at town meetings. Volunteers snapped at each other during search parties. A sense of guilt settled over the community, as if everyone bore some part of the burden for Rachel's disappearance. Emily's dreams turned darker. She saw herself wandering the woods at night, always chasing Rachel's shadow. Sometimes she heard Rachel calling Emily, "Help me," but her voice was lost in the wind. Mrs. Glasser, the town's oldest resident, invited Emily over one stormy afternoon. The old woman's house was cluttered with mirrors, salt, and protective charms. She spoke of things no one else would mention. The woods remember every secret, every lie, every loss. They're hungry. If you listen, you can hear them whispering at night. Emily left the house feeling both frightened and oddly comforted. She clutched Rachel's scarf, breathing in the fading scent, and swore again that she would not stop searching. By the end of the 5th week, hope in Elm Ridge was wearing thin. People returned to their routines, but their eyes darted to the shadows at every sound. Margaret stopped answering the phone. Harold stopped speaking altogether. Emily, fueled by stubborn love and rising dread, continued her quest because she knew that somewhere, in the secrets and shadows of Pine Hollow, the truth was waiting to be found. Beyond the veil, the nights in Elmridge seemed to stretch forever as October faded into November. Cold fog rolled in from Pine Hollow, swallowing streetlights and muffling the hum of the little town. Emily Carter grew increasingly restless, spending more time with Rachel's journals and her own nightmares than with any living soul. Her mother noticed the change. "Emily, you have to let the police handle this," she pleaded one night, standing in the doorway of Emily's dimly lit bedroom, but Emily couldn't stop. She sensed that the truth wasn't buried in official reports or polite town meetings, but somewhere deeper, just out of reach beyond the veil that separated the ordinary world from whatever lived in the woods. Emily started to see things others didn't. She glimpsed shadows flickering at the edges of mirrors and puddles. Once, while brushing her teeth, she saw Rachel's reflection in the glass, for a split second pale, eyes wide, lips moving in a silent warning. Emily spun around, but the room was empty. School became unbearable. Friends avoided her, teachers gave her extra time on assignments she barely noticed. At lunch she sat alone, scribbling spirals and words into her notebook. "The hollow, the woods remember, help me." Late at night, Emily walked to the edge of Pine Hollow. The wind stung her face, carrying the scent of wet leaves, and something old or something wrong. She'd stand in the dark, waiting, listening for the whispers she'd heard in her dreams. Detective Hadley, too, found himself haunted. He called the surviving brother of Margaret Troska, girl who'd vanished in 1983. Her case forever unsolved. The man lived alone in a decaying farmhouse outside of town, surrounded by overgrown weeds and broken dreams. She talked about the hollow. The man muttered, eyes unfocused, said something waited for her there. "I never believed it until she was gone." Hadley wrote the words in his notebook, his hand trembling. That night he dreamed of black trees and endless darkness, children's faces pressed against the glass, silent and pleading. Emily spent hours at the library, digging into Elmridge's past. She discovered a pattern of missing children and strange events every generation. She found old stories of the hollow mana creature who waited in the woods, stealing the lost, the sad, the forgotten. Mrs. Barnes, the librarian, watched Emily with growing concern. "Some things aren't meant to be found, Emily," she warned quietly, but Emily shook her head. "Rachel needs me. She's not gone, not really." She's trapped. One rain-swept evening, Emily heard Rachel's voice more clearly than ever. As she closed her eyes, the room seemed to shift. She saw Rachel standing among the trees, hair damp, hands trembling. "Don't let him take you, too," Rachel pleaded. "It's hungry, Em." The spiral opens, and it takes what it wants. Emily gasped awake, heart racing. She scribbled every detail into her journal, refusing to let the vision slip away. The border between dreams and waking life thinned. Emily started losing time, finding herself at the edge of the woods with no memory of walking there. Her shoes caked in mud, Rachel's scarf clutched tightly in her fist. She confided in Detective Hadley. He listened, not with skepticism, but with the hollow exhaustion of someone who'd seen too much. "We have to go back," he said. Together, we have to see what's waiting in the hollow." That night, the two of them met by the old bridge, their flashlights barely cutting the fog. The forest was eerily silent, every step echoing louder than it should. Emily felt the spiral tugging at her mind, drawing her deeper with every heartbeat. As they reached a clearing, the air grew cold, so cold that Emily could see her breath curling away. The ground was bare, a perfect spiral of charred grass at the center. Emily knelt, running her hands just above the ashes. Suddenly a whisper filled the clearing. Not the wind, not an animal, but a voice both near and impossibly far. "Emily." Rachel's voice trembling and desperate. Emily stood, searching the darkness. "Where are you?" A shadow shifted between the trees. For a moment, Emily saw Rachel's face, paled eyes wide with terror. Hadley raised his flashlight, but the battery sputtered and died. The clearing plunged into darkness. Emily's heart thudded in her chest as she clung to the memory of Rachel's voice. "Don't let it take you, Em. Don't let it win." The veil had lifted, and for the first time, Emily saw what waited beyond. A hunger older than the town. A darkness that never truly left. A promise that, in Elmridge, nothing was ever lost, forever only waiting to be found again. The hollowing. The air in Elmridge grew heavier by the hour. Townspeople sensed it, though few spoke of what they felt. Children refused to go near the woods. Parents triple-checked their locks at night, and the pastor added extra prayers to Sunday services. The stories about Rachel Moore became legends in real time, whispered over fences and in grocery store aisles. Did you hear what Emily Carter saw? The hollow man walks again? Emily Carter felt the pressure most of all. She could barely sleep, her nights full of visions. Rachel, lost in a spiral of darkness. Calling out but never quite reaching Emily's outstretched hand. Sometimes Emily wandered her house in the early hours, Rachel's scarf wrapped tight around her shoulders. The world felt stretched thin, as if something just beneath the surface was ready to break through. Detective Hadley called Emily often now. He shared the strange dreams he'd begun to have, dreams of black trees, and faces in the windows, of spirals burned into the grass, and a presence always just out of sight. "We're not dealing with anything normal," he said one night, his voice hoarse on the phone. "I think we need to go back, Emily, all the way in. I think that's where we'll find her, or at least the truth." Emily agreed. She was tired of waiting, tired of fearing the woods. She spent an evening packing a backpack with Rachel's journals, flashlight, her phone, and a small pendant Rachel had given her on her 15th birthday. She wrote a note to her mother, just in case. Hadley met her just before midnight, parked at the end of the old logging road. The night was colder than any before, the mist thick enough to taste. "We stay together," he told Emily, forcing a brave smile, "no matter what." They moved slowly into Pine Hollow, following the old trails. The deeper they went, the more the world seemed to shift. Nocturnal sounds faded. The fog pressing closer, the spirals of burnt grass, glowing faintly in the darkness. At the heart of the woods, they found it. A wide clearing, the ground charred and lifeless. A perfect spiral etched in the earth. Emily felt dizzy, her thoughts circling endlessly. "I've seen this in my dreams," she whispered. As they stepped into the clearing, the temperature dropped suddenly. Their breath hung in the air, clouds of panic. Hadley's flashlight flickered and went out. The silence deepened, total, suffocating. A whisper slithered from the shadows. "Emily." She turned. In the center of the spiral stood Rachel, her form flickering like a dying candle, eyes wide with terror. "Help me," Rachel pleaded. "He's coming. It's always been here." Behind Rachel, the darkness twisted. A figure emerged, taller than any human, limbs impossibly long, face obscured by a curtain of oily black hair. The Hollow Man. Hadley tried to step forward but found himself rooted to the spot. The air vibrated, the spiral pulsed with hungry light. The Hollow Man's voice filled the clearing, not with sound but with thoughts cold, ancient, and endless. She called. I answered. Debt must be paid. Emily felt her knees buckle. But she remembered Rachel's pendant, the last thing connecting them to the world before the shadows. She held it out. A faint glow shimmered from the silver, lighting the darkness. Rachel's form grew stronger for a moment. Emily reached out, fingers brushing the ghost of her friend's hand. "Come home, Rachel," she whispered through tears. "Don't let him take you." The spiral on the ground blazed with light. The Hollow Man recoiled, faces of all the lost Margaret Trask, others from old clippings, swirling in his shifting form. Emily screamed, summoning every ounce of love and memory she held. She refused to let go. The woods exploded with sound-cracking branches, howling wind, shadows fighting against the light. Hadley broke free, pulling Emily back as the spiral's glow faded. Rachel's voice echoed one last time. "Thank you, Em." Suddenly it was silent. The clearing was empty, the spiral nothing more than a faint scar in the earth. Emily sobbed in Hadley's arms, both of them shaking, hearts pounding with fear and relief. But in that silence, both of them knew something in Elmridge had changed forever. Return. The aftermath of that night in Pine Hollow hung over Elmridge like a morning mist that refused to lift. Emily Carter barely spoke. She remained in her room, staring at the pendant that had glowed in the spiral's heart. Replaying every detail, the burning light, Rachel's face, the moment the Hollow Man faded into nothing. Detective Hadley filed his final report, but left out much of the truth. There was no way to explain to his superiors the things he had seen, the darkness that moved like a living thing, the voices of lost children swirling in the fog, the flash of light that felt like hope and sorrow together. He submitted his resignation 2 weeks later, choosing silence and solitude over pretending. Rachel Moore's case was never officially solved. The town paper ran a story about closure and healing, but those who were there knew better. Emily attended school, drifting through the halls, clutching Rachel's old scarf. Some classmates welcomed her back. Others avoided her, whispering stories of ghosts and madness. Still, she walked the corridors, eyes bright and haunted, determined not to let go of Rachel's memory. Margaret Moore closed up Rachel's room. Sometimes, she'd sit on the porch in the evenings, looking toward the woods. She thought she saw her daughter sometimes, standing just at the edge of the trees, waving goodbye. Life in Elmridge slowly resumed its routines. The search party stopped. Parents allowed children outside again, though never near the woods after dark. The church held a memorial for Rachel, the pews filled with silent prayers. Townsfolk left flowers and notes at the edge of Pine Hollow, little shrines of hope and remembrance. Emily visited the clearing one last time at dawn. Spiral was gone, grown over by grass and wildflowers. But she felt Rachel's presence warm, close, forgiving. Emily knelt, pressed the pendant into the earth, and whispered, "I'll remember you. I'll remember them all. You're not alone. Not ever again." On her way home, Emily felt lighter. The birds sang. The air smelled sweet, clean. The pain was still there, sharp, raw, but it was softened by love and memory. Detective Hadley moved to a cabin by the lake, spending his days fishing and his nights watching the stars. Sometimes he thought he saw the spiral reflected in the ripples of the water. Sometimes he dreamed of Rachel Moore, her smile bright, her eyes free of fear. The legend of the Hollow Man faded, but never truly died. Teenagers dared each other to spend a night in Pine Hollow. Elders warned them to respect the woods, to listen to the wind, to leave offerings of salt at the edge of the trees. But Elmridge was healing, and in the heart of every survivor a promise endured. The shadows would always wait, but love would never stop searching.